What's up, YouTube? How's it going, guys and girls and everybody in between? Today we are going to talk about Destiny hotfix 3203. I'm not going to say all the points that came out yesterday, June 3rd, 2021. Fixing a couple things here. We're going to start with all of the free roam fixes. They've added an energy barrier to the Scavenger's Den Lost sector on the EDZ that will prevent you from skipping the majority of the encounters while playing it on Master or Legend difficulty. And they've also fixed the empty tank on the Tangled Shore. It will now reward the correct exotic gear in line with the other Lost Sector reward rotation. We've also got some raid fixes in this hotfix. The Vault of Glass armor mods will now appear in the Collections tab. They fixed an issue where players could kill Atheon by tethering supplicants as they self-destruct. I feel like that's strategy, not really a bug, but what do you do? Fixed an issue where players could kill Atheon in the future Venus portal before starting the encounter. I don't know if anybody's ever encountered this. I did one run of Vault of Glass where the team I was with really wanted to do this Atheon exploit, and I felt very dirty doing it. I did not really like the way it felt. I stood there for 7 minutes and waited for two guys to kill Atheon, and it was just not a whole lot of fun, so I'm glad that they're fixing that. They've also fixed an issue where players could break Minotaur shields in the Gatekeeper encounter using the Prometheus lens, and they've also fixed an issue where the Aegis Relic blocking ability was not continuously blocking damage. Now on to some gameplay and investment fixes. So for armor, the Path of the Burning Steps for the Titans will no longer grant a stack of its buff on becoming slowed by stasis, only when becoming encased. The Star Eater scales will now correctly grant its damage bonus while the player is standing in the Well of Radiance, and the status icon for the Feast of Light now correctly scales up to 8 times. And they fixed an issue when calculating super bonus damage. Having 4 stacks of Feast of Light will grant a 55% bonus to super damage, and having 8 stacks will grant a 70% bonus to super damage. For context, for those of you that don't know, the original formula at the start of the season was a 60% bonus to damage for 4 stacks. And we've only got one weapon change in this hotfix. They fixed an issue where the Roar of the Worm ornament for the Whisper of the Worm's exotic geometry would disappear when walking against walls. Some bounty and pursuit fixes. They fixed an issue where projectile melee ability kills were not counting towards progress for step 4 of the Iron-Handed Diplomacy quest for Iron Banner. And they've also fixed an issue where the Capture Completionist Triumph would not properly unlock for some players. And now for the meaty portion of this hot fix, we've got these stasis changes. So general stasis fixes. Stasis freeze, they've reduced the duration of all non-super freezes versus players to 1.35 seconds. This freeze is too short to break out of, so we'll only be able to break out of a freeze when we are frozen by a super. And they've reduced the special heavy and light ability damage against frozen players from plus 50% to plus 5%. As far as stasis slow, it no longer reduces weapon accuracy and will increase weapon flinch when under fire, and will no longer suppress class ability and air moves such as Icarus Dash, so you'll still be able to dodge or Icarus Dash out of your slow. The Stormcaller's Ionic Blink is still suppressed when slow. They're planning on addressing that later, and they have reduced the movement speed penalty while slowed by about 20%. The Whisper of Hedron's Fragment no longer increases weapon damage after freezing, and it now increases weapon stability, weapon aim assist, mobility, resilience, and recovery after freezing. The Whisper of Rime Fragment will no longer provide overshields while in super. Cold Snap Grenades will no longer track after initial target acquisition, and they have increased the arming duration before the Seeker spawns from 0.3 seconds to 0.8 seconds, and they've reduced the detonation radius against players from 3 meters to 1.5 meters, and it will also bounce off walls now and detonate on the ground instead of detonating against the wall. Alright, and now we're going to get into the class specific changes. So for the Titan Behemoth, for Shiver Strike, they've reduced the flight speed and distance, reduced the knockback versus players, and removed the slow detonation on player impact. For Cryoclasm, it now requires the Titan to sprint for 1.25 seconds before activation while not in super, and they have removed the cooldown. For the Howl of the Storm aspect, they've reduced the angle of the initial freezing and damage cone, reduced the crystal creation freezing radius, and slowed down the sequence of crystal formation to allow victims more opportunity to escape, and it will now spawn a small crystal on walls if performed into walls. For the Super Glacial Quake, they've reduced the heavy slam vertical freeze range against players, and they've reduced the damage resistance from 50% to 47%. For the Hunter Revenant changes, we're seeing some changes to Withering Blade. They've reduced the slow duration versus players from 2.5 seconds to 1.5 seconds. They have reduced the Whisper of Durance slow duration extension versus players from 2 seconds to half a second. They've reduced damage versus players from 65 to 45. After one bounce, it is reduced further to 30. And they have reduced the projectile speed by 10% and reduced the tracking after bouncing off of a wall. For Winter's Shroud, they've reduced the slow duration versus players from 2.5 seconds to 1.5 seconds and have reduced the Whisper of Durance slow duration extension again versus players from 2 seconds to 0.5 seconds. And the Touch of Winter, Cold Snap Seeker will no longer have increased movement speed or travel distance, and the Cold Snap Seeker instead will spawn a small stasis crystal on detonation. For our Shadebinder Warlock friends, your Penumbral Blast will now have reduced tracking and proximity detonation size and tracking versus players, and they have reduced the freeze radius versus players when impacting the environment from 2.7 meters to 1.5 meters. Ice Flare Bolts, the Seeker will now only chain once when spawned from a player shatter. And Winter's Wrath, your super, the freezing projectile tracking strength now ramps down to 0 after 2 seconds of flight. And now into the last section of the hotfix notes with some reward changes. Seasonal reward sources, including locked override chests and the weekly vendor challenge, will now correctly contain seasonal class armor items and have been updated to reduce the frequency of getting duplicate items in succession. The Iron Banner machine gun and shotgun will now drop from the Iron Banner engram correctly this time around. The Vault of Glass Director tooltip will retain its pinnacle drop notification for classes that have not yet cleared it each week, as the drops will still be available. I came across this issue when I was doing VOG with my Titan last week. I finished it on my Hunter, went to do it on my Titan, and it didn't say that I would get pinnacle drops, but I still did. And the Vault of Glass secret chests are now properly dropping Titan and Warlock armor, and the Vault of Glass vendor purchase of the Templar package will no longer occasionally grant the wrong weapons or armor. Vault of Glass vendor purchase of the Templar package is also no longer locking itself out due to incorrectly detecting if the player has obtained all the possible results for the current character class. And the Vault of Glass vendor purchases of Conflux, Gatekeeper, and Atheon packages now correctly grant armor when such a result is rolled instead of nothing. And that's it, everybody. So if you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like down below. Let me know in the comments section what changes you are most excited to see and which changes you are not so excited to see. I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.